Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us in this information session on men's mental health in alignment with Movember next month. My name is Sarah Toma, and I'm the project manager with Governexx Network. I hope today's session encourages you to learn more about the signs and symptoms of mental health problems and talk honestly with the men in your lives. I have personally noticed powerful men struggle and suffer in silence at work and with my volunteer experience over the years, which begs the question, are men taught to suffer in silence? This is why we need to talk about a new mentality. Before we begin, a gentle reminder, unless you're one of the panelists, please have cameras off, mic on mute, and feel free to ask questions during the session through the chat or the Q&A function. I'm so excited for you to hear from our panelists today. First on the agenda, we are welcoming back Michael Cheng. He's no stranger to the Governexx Network and is a popular panelist. He's a registered clinical counselor who utilizes emotion and solution-focused therapeutic interventions to help his clients with a variety of issues, including depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma, and grief. Michael, you can start when you're ready.
All right, let's get the share screen thing going. Let's see, share screen. Oh, it says host disabled participant share screen. Is it possible to fix that there, Marcella? Oh, I got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. All of this is so crazy what we're doing right now. So everybody, my name's Michael. Obviously, Sarah did a really good job of introducing me. We're going to talk about a culture of loneliness and how to overcome it. We're going to talk about a little bit of statistics. We're going to talk a little bit about some strategies that you can have. I hope by the time we leave this presentation, you can have a lot of questions answered about how are we coping in this pandemic? How can we cope in general? How can we communicate a little bit more effectively? So those are hopefully the things that you leave this presentation with. To start off, just a little bit about me. Who am I? What do I do? Very great introduction by Sarah. I don't have to talk about it anymore. In terms of EAP counseling, some of you might not be familiar with that. EAP means employment assistance program. And what that means is essentially a provider provides employees with benefits. And I'm one of the counselors that provides those benefits. So companies like McDonald's, TELUS, the school districts within Vancouver, as well as a variety of students who work within those school districts. Those are the avenues of individuals that I typically work with. I also provide individual counseling, and I provide counseling with a large variety of different populations and cultures. Adults, adolescents, children. I also work with couples and also families. Overall, in today's presentation, we're focusing on men and mental health, and that's going to be the first bit of the work that we do today. And I want to kind of put out a safety warning with that, a more emotional safety about that. Specifically, the research that I have provided here is really focused on Western men, right? And even then, there's some assumptions. If you don't experience a lot of the issues located in this presentation, feel free to know that that's okay. Right? The information that I provide is for a general population. In addition, it's not meant to judge anyone for these issues as well. We are also missing out on like women's research in this presentation. And of course, that's because those are the guidelines that I've been provided with. I will try to bring a more balanced perspective on everything, but I just want everyone to know this. Overall, we're also going to work on strategies to improve self-compassion, reduce shame, something that men specifically struggle with a significant amount. Strategies to improve emotional regulation skills, communication skills, and learning about healthy relationships and how to overcome it. Overall, in terms of men and mental health, we find that rates of mental health are quite comparable between men and women, right? The issue is that men are often less likely to recognize, discuss, and seek help for mental health, meaning they often, like Sarah said, suffer in silence. And 80% of people who die by suicide are often men. And that's what we find here. My first question overall is just to check in with everybody, and this is going to be part of a poll. How many of you have been struggling? So Marcella, if you can pull up that poll for everyone to have a look at. Perfect. So how many would you say would how many of you would say that you're struggling because a relationship is not going where you would like it to go with a family member, friend, or even coworkers? It says I'm not allowed to vote, so I'll just look at the results after. How's my volume overall, Sarah? Is it okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. We'll just wait for those results, pop everything in. Let's have a look at what we got here. Ooh, that's a very balanced view here. One of the things that we often talk about in counseling is relationships. So whenever people come into my room, no matter what issue they're bringing up, it's always an issue related to a relationship that's not going well, right? And a lot of the data that you're showing me here is that a lot of people are doing quite well, but some people are not in the realm of relationships. Hopefully, we can help improve that for that 60% of you, right? So let's keep on going here. In terms of men and relationships, we find that within Gottman's research, he is a psychologist focusing on couples and interpersonal relationships. Only 35% of men are emotionally intelligent. What does that mean? Emotionally intelligent people are often more self aware, they manage their emotions more effectively, have more empathy, and are more engaged in relationships. And they often are very open and they avoid things like defensiveness and attacking, two behaviors that are very well established as shame behaviors. It is more a weird statistic that I was able to find is it is more important in successful relationships for men to be emotionally intelligent than for women to be. And that's very odd. And what the researcher said was that women often already have these skills. So the more successful relationship, it's often directly correlated with how emotionally intelligent the male in the relationship is. And again, just for the safety warning, this is for typical heterosexual relationships. We do not have a lot of research for, let's say, people in the LGBTQ2 plus community. So then that brings us to talking a little bit about shame, and we're just going to pull up the next poll here. How many of you are really experiencing a lot of shame right now? Shame meaning that you're kind of a little bit hard on yourself, you're struggling with some perfectionism, you're struggling with some guilt, right? How many of you are kind of beating up yourself right now? Ooh, I got to vote this time. Cool. That's fun. Much higher than the one before, right? So 77% versus 23%. You 23%, I'm loving that. That's really, really good. That's emotional resilience and healthiness, right? Coming out of there. So one thing we really struggle with is a lot of people really struggle with shame. And even though right now you might not be, in our daily lives, shame is actually a big part of how we live. In terms of the work that we have for men here, we find that shame is used by people to attempt to improve behavior. Oftentimes, a lot of people make a big difference. A lot of people don't notice the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I did something bad. It's something that you can actually change, right? If I practice for soccer, I'll probably be better at soccer. Next time I should have practiced. I should have exercised more. I should have I should have done a variety of different things. I am bad is something that's completely different. And this is very well established within our culture of blaming us for things that we really don't have any control over. And unfortunately for men, traditional masculine norms, something that both men in our culture reinforce, but also women reinforce, have a negative relationship with self compassion, right? So, what society respects in men is often something that often produces a lot of shame for us because we can't do anything about it, right? We know what the typical man that we all wish we could be. Some 6'4", 220-pound guy from Iceland. I don't know about you. There's not a lot of people like that in Vancouver, right? You'd have to go all the way to Iceland to find that. And not being that is a very shameful thing. And again, both women and men in our culture perpetuate this. These are some of the norms that we actually see in terms of what our society respects: winning, emotional control, risk taking, violence, dominance, playboy, self-reliance, primacy of work, meaning work is very important to you over anything else, power over women, oof, disdain for homosexuality, another oof, and a pursuit of status. So what we see here is, I don't know about you guys, men or women in this audience, this doesn't sound like a person I'd really want to be friends with. That seems pretty obvious. And even harder, this wouldn't be someone I would want to date. But what we find, especially in my couples work with my clients, we find that many of the individuals that I see who are in relatively successful relationships, the male has many of these traits or all of these traits, and they're hidden, right? No one's going to start first day and talk about how violent they are, but the way that they interact daily and the messages that they're learned every day really reinforces every single one of these beliefs in us, even to an unconscious way, right? So you might not even be conscious of some of these things. The big thing about shame is shame's best ally is not speaking. It's silent. So men who struggle with shame, just like men who struggle with mental health, they don't ask for help. They often are less active, they have less motivation and confidence, and are a higher risk for self-harm and suicide. And we can see that in terms of these detriments, we can see how shame can impact people in the workplace, definitely. Our next speaker will be talking about mental health in the workplace. People who experience a lot of shame are not very productive people in your workplace. Let's talk about some strategies. Let's leave behind some of the doom and gloom. How can we make it a little bit more effective for everybody? So self-compassion is a direct line to fighting against shame. It provides you with shame resilience. And there's three main elements of it. Self-kindness, very self-explanatory, easy to understand. Common humanity, meaning our ability to really normalize our issues by talking with people. I'm struggling right now with this COVID-19 pandemic. My wife says, I am too. That sharing of struggle, knowing that we all suffer, a very important part of self-compassion. Finally, mindfulness, a way that you can calm down your nervous system, help you regulate your emotions better. Some of the techniques we'll be practicing today, the gratitude journal, one of our very, very favorite exercises. I'll go more in depth on it as we go forward. Mindfulness, like I said above, and emotional awareness. So practicing understanding what sad, mad, happy, confused, excited means and being able to act on it so those emotions don't rule over you, but also to respect those emotions. Finally, improving communication skills. If you can navigate and manage your social space that you work or live in, you're going to be a much more self-compassionate and resilient person. This is a big message that I want everyone to take away from this today. If you remember 1% of this presentation, remember this 1%. You are worthy. You are allowed to have boundaries with people. And showing up and taking risks like going to work every day and asking a friend for help, or even just letting yourself cry, that's worth it, right? I want you to just remember that. That's one of the most important pieces there. Let's jump into the gratitude journal. And this is where we jump into the practical part of this exercise. I want everyone to pull out a piece of paper as I go through this. And what you're going to do is you're going to write 3 lines. And this is an exercise you can do every single day. At the end of the day, take a moment to write 3 lines and or talk about it with a close friend or family member. This is also a really good way to communicate. So pull up your piece of paper and you're going to write about things you are grateful that you have done and or things you are grateful that the world has given you just today. Nothing else. We're at the start of our day today, or for some of you, it's later on in the day in the East Coast. I want you to think about these issues and write 3 lines about it. Here's some of mine. Today I went to Walmart and one of the workers smiled at me. Very rarely happens because they're all wearing masks and I can't tell. Today I had an argument with my wife and we settled it very effectively, right? That's always nice. And today my daughter got up earlier and we played a little bit longer than normal. They can be very basic little things. It doesn't have to be, I found out the meaning of life and that was great, right? It can be small, small moments. So I'll just give everybody a few moments to write that out. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be monitoring the chat and seeing what you have there. Let's see. And if someone can read out some of the chat things too, that'd be helpful. I can answer questions. Ooh. Let's see. Chat 17. Okay, now I'm looking at the chat. So if anyone has any questions, or if anyone even wants to share theirs in the chat, that'd be cool too. We'd love to see that.
So I had one. I said that I'm thankful all speakers are here today and technology is working. We have another one, thankful to be working from home. Gallup says I had time for a second cup of coffee.
That's always nice. I like that
We have
one too.
another one saying, thankful for my family and that we're all safe, grateful that we're healthy, thankful to be able to help our clients, had nice snuggles with my dog this
I
morning.
love that one, Josie. That's a very specific one. I like that one. I managed to reach age 51. That's a very good one too. I love that. And when you write these at home, guys, I love that you guys are being all ranges from specific to general. The more specific you are, the more you'll be able to write something new every single day. Gratitude journal really is a endurance exercise. You really have to be consistent, and you'll find that as a theme in all the exercise today. Let's give it another 30 seconds here.
We have a question saying, can you be grateful for something you tried to do but were not successful?
Yes, that actually goes back to showing up and taking risks is worth it, right? That is all about gratitude. Your ability to really take a risk and try something different. That's amazing. That definitely counts. I had a nice one-on-one with my 7-year-old. My daughter's 8 years old, so that's always a good one. She had bad dreams, so I didn't sleep very well. That's why my words are messed up. I'm currently eating. That's a great idea. Currently eating is a great gratitude statement. Okay, let's see.
We have a nice one here. Thankful for peanut butter pretzels. I'm currently eating.
That's a good one. Let's do 20 more seconds here. Admire snowflakes. We don't have any snow here in BC. You guys have snowflakes. We can watch those on YouTube. I'll pay my rent. Super important. Okay, folks. Very good. Keep putting in the chat. We're very interested. But let's move on to the next step over here. What are the benefits of gratitude journaling? Why the heck am I even asking you to do this stuff? Helps to improve sleep, lower stress, improve interpersonal relationships, can bolster generosity. Your ability to trust other people is generosity. Your ability to believe in other people, that's generosity. Your ability also to give things to other people, that's generous as well. Reduces materialism in adolescence. As we move through this culture of phones and video games and toys and Christmas and all these days that we get presents for, children are going to start noticing some of these really detrimental aspects of our society. Doing some gratitude journaling, even as a conversation with your child, incredibly helpful. Adolescence, by the way, means teens, and it also works with children, maybe with pictures or just a conversation. It can lower risk of heart disease. Crazy. It's got some physical health symptoms there. It can lower symptoms of depression. As a group activity, it can improve communication and positivity. It's a very, very helpful exercise, and I really encourage everyone to do it. As you notice, again, if you are a boss or you are a supervisor, notice how some of the people that you work with or work underneath you, they struggle with all of these things. And notice how all of that costs a lot, definitely, right? Especially within the EAP program, but also, and also in sick leave and all those different issues, but also how this can really impact them daily and really run people down, right? When we talk about burnout, these are some of the reasons why they have it. They're struggling with their physical health. They're not sleeping as well. Their stress is at an all-time high. Even the amount of stress that they could have handled before, they can't handle now because their resilience and strength is gone, right? So something to keep in mind. Another exercise that we'll work on is mindfulness exercises, ways that you can directly tackle your body. I love doing 10 deep breaths. It's one of the easiest exercises I teach my clients. Mindfulness is all about taking away some of the thoughts, taking away some of the emotions, things that we really can't control, and focusing only on the physical symptoms. Whenever I ask a lot of my clients, what does depression or anxiety feel like to you? Globally, they say it feels pretty crappy, right? And I want you guys to keep that in mind. We can control how we feel physically. We can stretch more. We can drink more water. We can do some deep breaths. We can do a variety of different things, stretch. What you can't control is thoughts and emotions because those are driven by the outside environment, some things that you sometimes can't control. And in this world where more and more of our control is taken away from us because of a pandemic, obviously the best thing to do is to take control of what we can control. You can also name 5 of your symptoms. If you can identify how you're feeling, it often makes you feel better. Weighted blankets, I love those. If you're feeling a lot of anxiety, something holding you, very, very helpful. Discussing and normalizing anxiety with a friend, with a family member, with your children, right? Let's say you're trying to support your children's anxiety. This is also a way to support your anxiety too. The dive reflex, this is a fun one, where our heartbeat slows and blood moves from the limbs to the chest whenever our face gets splashed with water, right? So sometimes I ask my clients, when you're feeling a lot of anxiety, run to the washroom, splash some water on your face. That can be very helpful. Exercise, very important. Spending time with pets and loved ones. Having skin to skin contact, very important. Let's work on an exercise today. We're going to go ahead and practice 10 deep breaths. We're going to do 5 regular breaths, and we're going to do 5 special breaths that I'll teach you as you go forward. So I want everyone to spend some time to put their feet on the ground, sit back a little, roll their shoulders back, and we're going to have our eyes closed over here. I'll close my eyes with you. And what we're going to do is we're going to practice the exercise of doing 10 deep breaths. And this is something that you can take away with you from today. So your feet are rooted in the ground like before. Your knees are maybe at 90 degrees. You're sitting up straight. Your shoulders are rolled back. Your stomach is relaxed. Your eyes are closed. And what you're going to do is you're just going to inhale with your nose and then exhale with your mouth like you're blowing through a straw. Like that. We're going to do 5 together normally, and then we're going to do 5 in a very special way that might be even more helpful. Let's inhale. And now we can exhale. Very good. And this is helping me with my nerves too right now. Let's do 4 more. Inhale. And exhale. 3 more. Inhale. Exhale. Even slower. Try to breathe even deeper. Notice the shoulders fall, the stomach relaxed. Inhale. Exhale. 1 more for the halfway point. Inhale. Exhale. Now, keeping the eyes closed, now we're going to do it in a very special way. We're going to inhale like normal, but we're going to exhale with a deep hum, just like this. Hum. And try your best to do it as loud and as long as you can. Best thing about this is no one is around to judge you. Your mics, your cameras are off, and you're just in your house, right? Maybe the people who live with you might judge you a little. That's okay. Let's inhale. Hold it, and now exhale with a hum. Even better. See, notice how the chest is rumbling and the body's relaxing even more, maybe. 4 more. Inhale. Exhale. Loud and long is important. I do louder, but I don't want to I don't want to ruin everyone's ears. 3 more. Inhale. Exhale. 2 more. Inhale. Exhale. 1 more. Inhale. Exhale. Keep your eyes closed and just spend the next 10 seconds, I'll count it down for you, paying attention to how your body feels after doing that. We just did a very physical thing. When you do 10 deep breaths, your body naturally relaxes. But now it's your job to notice it relaxing. Notice how the shoulders have fallen down. See, maybe they were here and now they're pushing down, right? Maybe it's easier to breathe. Maybe the thoughts that are in your head about not being good enough or all the stuff you have to do today, maybe they're a little bit more quiet, a little more settled. Maybe that headache you've had or the tiredness you feel, maybe that's drifted away. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes And now let's pull up the poll, right? Let's pull up the poll and see how everyone felt, right? So let's pull up the next section of that.
Michael, we have a question. It says, can you
Okay.
explain the Hun exhale? What is the sound doing for us?
We'll go through that when we go through the benefits section. So I will definitely go through that. Ooh, I get to vote again. Haha, 2. I always like to vote because I can do something. That's a great question, Barbara, by the way. We'll definitely go through that. And yes, Amber, thanks for answering that for her. Let's look at the results for this. I really love this one. Yeah, reduced temperature, that's not happening for our people in Ontario right now. Yeah, they've never been hot at all. I love the improved breathing. More calm is a definite one. Reduced tension, less shaky, jittery, emotionally regulated. I love these. This is very, very good. I'm noticing the more logical one doesn't have more. People find that your thinking is often more effective when you're in a calmer place, right? So I really love a lot of these physical symptoms in all of you is being reduced. This is a routine you can actually do every single day. Do it in the morning before you start your anxiety-filled day with kids and wife and workplace and running everything in your household. Practice some deep breaths or do any of these activities. Why are we doing a lot of this? Clients often report the following symptoms when describing anxiety or low mood or pretty much any mental health issue. All of the things I've listed here. These things all affect people in the workplace. These things really impact productivity, motivation, confidence. It makes things very difficult. And you notice that almost every single one of these are physical symptoms. The physical symptoms are what we can worry about, right? That's what we need to manage. And when we're thinking about the hum breathing and why is it more effective, is because it accesses more physical, it's a more physical exercise. And what I mean by that is when you do that hum breathing, it activates something in your body called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is one of 12 cranial nerves, and you don't have to hear about all that. But basically what the vagus nerve does is it helps you moderate anxiety, helps you perform more effectively socially, and also it helps you manage those low moods that we get into and the feeling of being very tired. And when you do that breathing, the vagus nerve is actually directed from the forehead all the way down to the stomach, right? And when we do that breathing, we feel the throat, we feel the chest, and we can actually feel that we're kind of turning on the vagus nerve and making it more effective. And when people feel a lot of anxiety and a lot of low moods, sometimes the vagus nerve is not working for them. They're not managing those physical symptoms very well. When the vagus nerve is not working, you can see these symptoms happening. When the vagus nerve is working, these symptoms start leaving, right? I hope that answers the question. And again, I could go more in detail, but we're not doing a whole science thing here today. So let's move on to the communication pieces, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about some common complaints that we hear from both men and women, right? So I'm just going to pull that up here. So for men, we often hear these things. And again, heterosexual relationships, this might not apply to you. I want to always have that safety statement there. She never listens to me. I try to talk to her, she keeps walking away. She is sensitive / more emotional. She's always yelling. I don't want to trouble her. For women, there's a lot of very similar things. He never understands. He doesn't understand emotions, but overall, we have a great relationship. That's a very weird statement I hear a lot, by the way. Somehow the relationship's really well, but he doesn't understand a major part of what makes relationships work. You would be surprised by, I would say, 80 to 90% of my heterosexual couples that struggle, they say this exact same thing, and it's coming from the woman most of the time. He never talks to me. He never takes my side. I don't want to trouble him either. You notice that both men and women have this substantial care for each other, but they don't want to connect for some reason. And you can see there's no connection at all in these statements. A lot of these statements are actually very shameful too. They're about things that she's detrimental of, right? She's sensitive and more emotional. What can we do about that? That's a very shameful statement that does not invite improving, right? So shame is a big part of all these complaints here. And this is why we want to change the way we communicate. So what we know is that emotional awareness is something that leads to connection. So the more emotionally aware we are, the more mindful of our shame, the more self-compassionate we are, the more we will connect with the people in our life. We often disengage from others and numb emotion instead of holding ourselves accountable to feeling those emotions or doing the actions to connect with people. Unfortunately, when people do this, and we've all done this before, I feel like crying, but I'm going to turn it off because I need to be strong for my family. But what happens is you also numb joy. You also numb excitement. You don't get to pick which emotions you want to throw away. You unfortunately throw them all away. And this is why a lot of people who struggle with depression, especially in the highest levels of depression, when we assess them, the highest numbers, or they score very high in the depression index, those individuals always report feeling almost nothing. They have no excitement, no love, no sadness, no anger. They don't even like the things that they used to do. Life becomes a gray place when we try to numb even one of our emotions. And feeling shame, this again results in a lot of great destructive behaviors. Behaviors that again would impact you in the workplace. Violence, both emotional, physical, and even cognitive, addiction, eating disorders, many, many issues. So let's try to work on that a little bit, folks. Let's try to work on that. But before we jump into that, I do want to know if any of these common complaints are something that you all struggle with as well. So I forgot that poll there. Can we pull that up? And again, this might not be what you hear or what you're saying, but maybe variations of this. I have definitely heard these from my partner before. Let's look at the chat here. Is anything? 91%. Oof, that's a lot. That's actually a significant amount. That's very, very interesting. That's actually more than I thought there would be. But as we can see that even within our population of, let's say, 100 people, which is actually statistically significant, if we're looking at statistical sciences, this is actually quite typical, is what we would see. That's more than I thought it would be. So you've all proven I'm right. Great, I can publish a paper now. So let's go have a look at the next section. Let's pull up another pool. How many people are experiencing disconnected emotionally from their partner right now, or just disconnected in general? Dawn, we will be giving you a copy of this. I send it to Sarah. She bothers me for it. I love doing it. I love sending it to her. So let's pull up that question. Let's pull up that poll. I think we already did. Let's see the results of that too. I don't know if any of you can see me. Can you see me and the presentation?
Yes, we see
okay, cool.
you and
so I'm bobbing my head.
Yeah.
Good.
I just let the poll run about 30 seconds.
That's great. Yeah. A little bit less disconnected misunderstanding. The funny thing about the difference in this, and I knew there would be a difference, is again, when we go through these shame behaviors over here, again, I want you to remember that these are reinforced by our culture, right? We want, unfortunately, we want people with those traits that I listed before. Winning, right? We like winning. We like people who are career oriented. Unfortunately, we also like people who like to dominate other people. We like bullies for some reason. Our culture makes this happen. It's not only men that make this happen, it's women and men together creating a society of disconnection and toxic masculinity and all these things that we don't want our society to have. These are things that we're also teaching our children also unconsciously, right? And I don't care what I don't care what type of person you are or what cultural background you come from. Many other cultures, even outside of Western cultures, again, perpetuate some of these issues. And again, it's leading us to a place where we're more disconnected than ever. Right? So let's move on from there. So again, lots of doom and gloom. Let's move over to an activity, okay? This is called the red, blue, yellow activity. I've also subbed in green for it just because it's more stoplight-like. And this is an activity that I really like to practice with a lot of my couples when they are misunderstanding each other emotionally. We know that there's so many emotions and not everyone is well versed and educated in talking about all their emotions. I love using the red, blue, yellow activity to help people practice. How do we do this? Let's say you and your wife are struggling with understanding each other's emotions, right? You're going to draw three faces. The three faces will kind of look like this. Don't judge me. I'm not good at drawing. This is just what I think it could look like. And what you're going to see is you're going to try to label each one. In the red section, this is when you're stressed, angry, or sad. All of the emotions that we really struggle with. In this zone, the red zone is what we call it, you are unreasonable, you're unpredictable, you are inflexible, meaning that there's no way to convince you and you're disengaged. People in the red zone, people who struggle with anxiety, low mood, or even can't pay their bills, these people can actually they can actually have a reduced IQ. When you are in the red zone, your IQ can drop by 2 standard deviations, which could be 30 to 40%. Imagine how large that is. 30 to 40% of your IQ drops when you are unregulated. That is a person that we do not need to talk to. But when you're in the blue zone, you pull yourself out of the red zone. This is where we talk about approaching stress or approaching calm. And you write down how this feels for you. This is, again, an activity that you can do with your spouse, a great activity that you actually can work with kids. This research actually here comes directly from autism spectrum disorder. Something that autistic children often struggle with is labeling an emotion. And this is a great way to teach that. Children can really benefit from this. Adolescents can really benefit from this. In terms of this presentation, men very much can benefit from this. Yellow zone, very self-explanatory, productive, fair, happy, calm processing time. Luckily, red, blue, yellow also produces a list of actions that we can do. Are you somebody that loves to solve a problem? If you're male, more statistically likely you will be. Red means leave and get out of there. Leave your wife alone. She's not prepared to really talk to you right now. Blue zone, maybe she can be pulled out of it a little bit. Maybe you can think of something to do. Yellow zone, everything's going well. How can we maintain what's going on right now? And once this activity is completed, go ahead and just ask each other every single day, honey, what zone are you in right now? You know, I'm in the red zone. I need some time alone. Hey, honey, how are you doing right now? I'm in the yellow zone. You're doing everything fine. Honey, how are you doing today? I'm in the blue zone. I really had a hard time at work. Can we talk about it in 30 minutes, right? A list of behaviors can be brought out of this. And this is something you can plan out with your partner. Signal your color, ask for your partners. Let's have a look here. So let's talk a little bit about statements from unhealthy relationships that we hear a lot, right? One of the things we often hear is that a lot of people speak in a way that often produce unhealthy relationships or perpetuate patterns in which they're disconnected. I just wish my parents told me what was going on. In this pandemic sort of thing, where there's so many topics where we don't want to share with our kids, divorce, abuse being very, very prominent within mental health issues, right? We try to protect our kids from these issues, but our kids are smart. Your kid knows when you're sad. Your kid knows when you're lying to them about being sad, angry, or anxious. Sharing usually is going to lead to more connection. It's going to make you feel better too. He does not understand my emotions. He always tries to fix things rather than listen. This is a piece of feedback we get a lot from women talking about their male partners. We never spend time away from each other. Very, very important because we're being locked down right now. We never spend time with each other. Another issue that we find as well. We're working from home and the work is now, we're now turning 8-hour days into 12-hour days. She's sensitive. I'm more stable, right? Kind of making a judgment call on people. I don't know what to say when we get in fights. These are issues that can be solved. We can manage these issues with practicing more communication skills. If you can communicate better, the more connected you can be. If you can be honest about your emotions, the more connected you can be. Let's move on to the next one. So we're going to work on improving our communication skills here. And again, this is an activity that I want everyone to kind of practice today. Relationships are the main reason why people come into my counseling room specifically. This is something that William Glasser has said as well. The majority of the time, if it's about work, if it's about your girlfriend, if it's about feeling lonely, it's always about a relationship. When you're not feeling heard, try practicing a very simple rubric. Observe, feeling, plan, right? Talk about what you're noticing from your partner. Honey, you're really not hearing me right now. Talk about your feeling, your emotion. Try to pick any emotion you want. There's no wrong answer. I feel sad about that. Make a plan. Can you talk? Would you mind letting me speak for a little bit? So simple. Or whenever we get into these patterns, things don't work. Can we try to problem solve a better way to talk with each other? Observe, feeling, plan is a very, very easy strategy that I help teach my clients. When you're in conflict, repeat, consent, ask. You would not believe how many times I'm doing my counseling work with somebody and they're complaining that the partner does not understand. I've spent 30 minutes in a session of two people arguing about a microwave. And one person was arguing about a microwave and the other person was arguing about not feeling heard. See how crazy that can be? But that is a pattern that we all find ourselves in. One person's arguing about A, the other person's arguing about B. They think they're arguing about the same thing. And that's a big mistake. Instead of trying to win or lose an argument or trying to be right or wrong, instead of saying me or you, try using the word we, trying to try to lead the argument towards connection rather than productivity or winning. Productivity and winning is a great place to be, but that's not a great place to be when you are arguing, when you are, let's say, red zoned and unreasonable. So let's do a little sample statement. I'm gonna give you guys some situations. This is a sample statement just for me to kind of show you how it works. So your girlfriend, Julia, has been very emotional lately. She has a short fuse and seems to have lost interest in spending time with you. She's late for dinners, all of these issues, you can read it. What are some of your top observations that you can see? What should you keep in mind? Right? These are some of the things that Julia is struggling with in the situation. She's struggling with a lot of shame. She's not asking for help. Supporting shame requires connection. Julia does not need a lot of advice right now. She's not performing well. She's a smart enough person to know what she needs to do. If you trust your girlfriend, you know that right now what she needs is connection. Let's have a look here. So what might I say? Using observe, feeling, plan, I might say, hey, Julia, I noticed that we just got in a very heated conversation there. We got into an argument. That's the observation. Simple as that, right? There's no judgment in that statement. It's very hard to argue with that. The statement was heated. The problematic way of saying this was, hey, Julia, I noticed you were being a gigantic a-hole. Not a great way to do an observation because that puts Julia on the defensive. It made me feel very sad and angry about it. I want to make our relationship better. Is there a better way I could be supporting you right now? Feeling and plan. Very simple sentence structures here. We could also do repeat, consent, ask. Hey, Julia, I'm hearing you are very angry with me right now about what's happening in our relationship. Consent. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly? Are you actually angry? Sometimes Julia might not be angry. Maybe she has a loud voice. We hear that a lot in our couples relationships. I feel like she yells at me all the time. No, my voice is just like that, right? That's something where you're just missing each other. Then you ask, do you need me to just listen right now? Or would it be okay if I shared my thoughts? So simple. It's hard to do these things. Do these statements sound kind of robotic? Yes, they do. But the more you practice, the more you can be consistent, and consistent, the more effective these statements will sound. And this is how I diffuse arguments with my wife. These are the ways that I teach my clients to disengage or to support themselves when they're struggling. Let's try to summarize all that stuff right there. Are you present in the moment, or are you focusing on the past or the future? When you're talking with someone, focus on right now. It doesn't matter what she did 2 years ago. It doesn't matter what her mom said about you. It doesn't matter how whatever's going to happen in the future. It happens what's happening right now is what matters. What is the real relationship need here? Are we really talking about microwaves, or are we talking about the fact that you don't feel heard and I'm not meeting your needs right now? Are you trying to change someone? Could you try to understand instead? People are very stubborn, adults especially. Try to understand them. If you understand them, if you're connected with them, it's going to be a lot easier to change them. Do they need to change at all? Maybe you need to manage the way that you're thinking about the situation. How slow are you going? When we're in the red zone, we talk a mile a minute, right? We are not very reasonable. It's very hard to follow us. Our IQ has dropped. We're saying lots of words that have no content. How much listening is happening versus talking? Very important. The more you listen, the more you take in, the more you understand, the better your speaking or talking will be. When is it time to disengage? Remember, in the red zone, you got to get out of there. Do you have a plan to disengage? Honey, when we get in big fights like this, we should both go for a walk. Make a plan like that. Let's do some practice scenarios as I jump into the chat here. Jack and Jane have been married for 15 years. They're arguing about productivity in the household. I want everyone to pull out their piece of paper and think about, based on what we've written, with observe, feeling, plan, so this stuff, or repeat, consent, ask, right? I want you to think about how you might solve this issue right here. What are some possible solutions, or what are some possible statements you would want to keep in mind? I'm going to look at the chat. We're going to give you 2 minutes on this because I'm coming close to the end of my time, and we'll see what we get out of it, okay? Let's have a look. Share your contact in the section. It took us 25 years to find that method. I love that, Brad. That's great. And again, please go ahead and put your answers in the chat if you would feel comfortable doing that, but also go ahead and try to write it out too. The best thing for these strategies is to write it out, because then it helps you understand and helps you judge how you're saying it. Lots of people make mistakes. Let's see. Yes, I will go ahead and end right after this one. Yeah, it's just because we're running out of time. Perfect. Yeah, so we'll just use this one statement today. Let's do just 1 more minute here. Okay, I'll leave it at that. And again, yeah, just running a little overtime. So we'll skip practice scenario 2, but again, I encourage you guys to think of some solutions. That's the end of our presentation today, folks. What I just want to remind all of you is that we have a lot of activities that we can do to help make our situations better. Here are some resources and books that I've accessed. These are my references. And I really hope that all of you, even though this is such a terrible and difficult time, are being more vulnerable, are talking about difficulties that you're sharing, and are practicing some skills to make things better. That's the only way that we can survive this time. That's the end of my presentation. Sorry for going a little long, Sarah, and I will leave it at that. Okay, folks? Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael, for yet another excellent presentation. Our next guest speaker is one of us, a 22-year veteran of the Federal Public Service. Jean-Francois Claude joins us today from the Center of Expertise on Mental Health in the Workplace at Treasury Board, where he serves as a senior advisor on workplace mental health. But in 2017, for his advocacy work in the area of men's mental health, Jean-Francois was awarded a meritorious service medal by His Excellency Governor General David Johnston and named one of Canada's leading difference makers for mental health by the Centre of Addiction and Mental Health. He's a past recipient of an Inspiration Award from the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre for his courage in sharing his story of living with chronic depression. Please welcome Jean-Francois Claude.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Michael, for your presentation to open up today's session. Look, when I joined the public service 22 plus years ago, if you would have suggested to me at the time that, one day I would be going around talking about mental health and more directly about my own experiences with struggling with mental illness, I probably would have used words like "you're crazy," "that's nuts," etc. In reference to that mere suggestion. And I think that speaks volumes to my own ignorance around mental health and my lack of knowledge of mental illness. And it wasn't until I went through sort of my own experience really that it was a huge eye opener. And that's what I'll be sharing with you today. I will speak a little less about the context in the workplace so that I can focus a bit more on the aspect of men's mental health in particular. But I do want to sort of make a link with one of the things that Michael said earlier about the primacy of work. And certainly, I think that you'll find that in a lot of cases when men, and again, you know, some of these are generalizations. And so let's keep that in mind. I'm obviously sharing my own experience, and not everybody will experience things in the same way. But certainly for me, one of the coping mechanisms, not realizing at the time that that's what it was to bury myself in work. So I went through a period of time, you know, where 60, 70-hour work weeks were the norm. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that you can only do for so long, right? We're all human, and we all have our limits. And at some point, you know, we reach those limits. And certainly that was the case for me several years back. So we're talking about 2012 here. And what I want to share with you is a little bit that first experience of reaching that breaking point where I decided that, you know, things couldn't go on the way that they had been going on, and that I needed to reach out to get help. And I remember this moment like it was, you know, yesterday. It was a Thursday in June of 2012. You know, I remember, you know, arriving at the office at 7 in the morning and realizing, you know, I'd already done 40 hours that week, and thinking to myself, oh, I should just, you know, take the next couple of days off, right? I've done my work week and it's only Thursday morning. But, you know, you tell yourself, oh no, you know, there's all this work that's waiting for me. And so you kind of push yourself to get through another day. I honestly don't remember what I was working on that day. It's what would happen later that evening that really would push me to realize that that I needed to get help. You know, and it was around 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and you know, I remember getting a phone call. I was still at the office, you know, going through various documents and whatnot, when the phone rang. And it was the now habitual phone call from home. Only this time, you know, my wife didn't ask me how my day had been going, or when I thought I might be home that evening, because that was always in doubt. It could easily be 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night before I got home. Because I was at that point in time consistently putting in those 12 to 14 hours a day physically in the office. So the phone rings, and it's early evening, and my wife's at the other end of the line. And the only thing she said to me was, your 4-year-old son is crying. No matter what I say or do, I just can't console him. You talk to him. And she puts my crying 4-year-old on the phone. Well, tell me, I mean, how do you explain to a 4-year-old why yet another night has gone by and daddy wasn't there for dinner? Another night has gone by and daddy's not there to, you know, give him his bath, or to read him his bedtime stories, to tuck him in, to kiss him goodnight. I couldn't explain it to myself, you know, much less my 4-year-old. And I remember, you know, just hanging up the phone and just breaking down into tears right there at my desk. And that was really sort of the last straw. Now, knowing what I know today about mental health, I can look back and see that the downward slide had started a good 1.5 years before that night. But I didn't recognize, because we didn't talk about mental health in 2012 as openly as we do today. And certainly it wasn't in my sort of experience, because we didn't talk about it. So I wasn't equipped to recognize what was really going on. In my view, it was just a temporary situation. A lot of it was driven by the workplace. And, eventually things would get better, only they didn't. And, they just kept getting worse and worse. So it's the next day, it's a Friday morning. I pick up the phone to call my doctor's office. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but in hindsight, I kind of like to think it was 11 minutes past 9 because, it was kind of my 911 call. I call my doctor's office and I explain, to the nurse at the other end of the line, the purpose of my call. And she stops me within, a minute or two. And basically the first thing out of her mouth was, but Mr. Claude, we haven't seen you in over 8.5 years. I'm not sure you're still a patient with us. I don't know if it's typical of men, but it was certainly my case, right? You're going through your 30s, you don't feel sick per se. You put off that one doctor's appointment and the next one. Next thing you know, 8.5 years have gone by and your health card has actually expired. But all this to say that I think it can be typical of men in those kinds of situations. In my view, I was probably experiencing work burnout, and that was the only way I could explain really what was going on. Not recognizing really, all of the sort of warning lights that were flashing on my dashboard, right? If I use a car analogy to use a little guy talk here, all the warning lights were popping up on the dashboard, but the engine was still running because I was able to perform at work, right? Only I wasn't performing outside of work. And even then, my performance at work was slipping in those final days that led to what I call now the breakdown. So the doctor's office did call back half an hour later and said, the doctor will see you on Monday. So I booked the appointment. I go to the doctor's office the following Monday, and I'm not quite sure what to expect, right? It's been 8.5 years since I last went to see the doctor. But in my mind, doctors are so busy these days, I'll be there for 5-10 minutes and, I can only discuss one health issue. If I've got more than one, I'll have to book another appointment. So you can imagine my surprise when, that appointment turned out to last almost an hour. And I wasn't quite sure, what was going on at that time. I was being run through all of these different kinds of questionnaires, and the doctor was trying to get a sense of, what exactly was going on. And it's really only towards the end of the appointment where things got cleared up rather fast. And that's when my doctor said to me, he said, Jean-Francois, you came here thinking that you're experiencing burnout, but burnout isn't an actual medical diagnosis. I'm like, oh no, well, what do you mean? Like, what am I experiencing? And that's when he told me, he said, well, you're going through a major depression, and I suspect you might have an underlying mood disorder. Excuse me? I wasn't willing to accept that diagnosis right then and there because it didn't make any sense to me. It had no basis in reality for me. Burnout seemed to me so much more acceptable, right? It just meant that I worked so hard. I burnt myself out and I needed a bit of a break. But I'm being told, no, it's major depression. I'm like, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? And that's when the doctor said to me, he said, well, it means that I'm giving you a note to give to your boss, and you're going to go back to the office. I'm giving you 1 hour to basically pack up your stuff. And you're going to tell your boss and your staff and your colleagues that you don't know when you'll be back in the office. And I'm like, well, hang on a second, doc. You don't understand, right? I've got work all the way up to here. Surely you can give me the rest of the week and I'll take off on Friday. And the doctor just shook his head and he looked at me and he said, look, when you walked into my office, we took your blood pressure and we had to take it 3 times just to make sure the reading was right. That's how high your blood pressure was. And, you could drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow morning. And trust me, the work will go on at the office with or without you. So that was a huge wake-up call. And literally, I went back to the office, packed up my stuff. I really don't remember what I said to my boss or my colleagues or my staff. If I said anything at all, maybe I mentioned something around stress leave, which again, I think speaks a lot to the stigma around mental illness, right? Stress leave is almost more acceptable in a workplace context than to just stroll back from your doctor's office and say, hey, I've been diagnosed with major depression. See you guys later. I don't know when I'll be back, right? But I mean, this all came as a shock to me, and it really, didn't sink in until much later into the sick leave. So I want to touch a little bit on that. I was the kind of person who took, great pride in my work, and that was my number one priority. I was very career driven. And, to have that come to a sudden screeching halt, right, was quite a shock to the system. And I remember that first day of being on sick leave, thinking to myself, well, first of all, I to put things into context, I would have to say that was probably the loneliest day of my life, right? When you're so used to having a certain rhythm to your life and schedule and driven by work, to have that come to a screeching halt where you're literally don't have any plans for the day, it really is something that I wouldn't want to live through again, quite frankly. And yet at the same time, it's probably the best thing that happened to me. So that feeling of being alone, again, was my own ignorance around just how common mental health issues and mental illness really is. What I didn't realize at the time was that, I was one of 500,000 Canadians who would be missing work that very week for mental health reasons. I was that one of the 1 in 5 Canadians who would experience a mental health issue that very year. And when it came to, depression, to me, and I'm not very proud to say this, but, to me, that was not a man's health issue. That was something that maybe women experienced, but men didn't experience depression, because I didn't know any men in my life who, had experienced depression. And yet, I was one of almost 1 million Canadian men who would go through a major depression that very year. So it was this whole education process around learning about the illness, and really coming to face with my own stigma around depression, anxiety as well. And I'll talk in a moment subsequently about the diagnoses that were later confirmed or received. But all this to say, I think that, when you go through a health experience, I think it's only natural, right, that we'd all sort of reach for Google and, want to look up the symptoms and, learn as much as we can about the illness. And I remember back then, again, we're talking 2012, not that long ago, 8 years ago. And I would, search terms like men and mental health, or men and depression, and men and anxiety. And there was very little information that was coming up. And don't get me wrong, there were some fantastic websites with great resources around mental health. I'm not going to name any of them, but at the time, a lot of those websites were sort of organized around what they considered to be their key audiences, right? So I would land on this mental health website, and there'd be a section on, children's mental health, and teen mental health, and seniors' mental health, and women's mental health. And that's where things would stop. There was no section on men's mental health. So that only really contributed to the added stigma of being a man with a mental illness. Because again, I think it's part of our cultural conditioning, right? We're taught from an early age that, men don't cry, boys don't cry. So we learn to sort of suppress our emotions and not really deal with them. And so, it made you feel in a certain respect invisible. It was such a rare occurrence, for a man to have depression, that it wasn't even worthy of mention on a mental health website. we've come a long way though since then, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. It's partially what drove me into sort of the advocacy field around men's mental health initially, but then that expanded into workplace mental health and the work that I'm doing today at Treasury Board. It certainly wasn't when I first joined the public service. It wasn't even at the forefront of my mind or at the back of my mind that one day I'd be sort of joining the HR community. I've always been sort of in public affairs, communications, and that kind of field. But it took my own experience with major depression and a work stoppage and a return to work to sort of realize, what really animated me and to make that career transition. So at the time, there were some resources, but they were mostly international. And I thought to myself, I've got some skills. I'm able to, at least work the basics of WordPress. So I created a website that was dedicated to men's mental health. And in that same year, in 2012, I learned a bit more about Movember, which is one of the reasons why we're holding this event today. Is to acknowledge that Movember isn't just about, prostate cancer or testicular cancer, but since 2012, it's also about men's mental health. And that was really the first year that the Movember campaign, decided or announced that they would be dedicating a portion of the funds raised to support men's mental health initiatives in Canada. And I can give you one example of a Movember-funded project that really, I think, is a great resource for men today. And that's Heads Up Guys, that was created by the Men's Health Program at UBC. So if you have an opportunity to check out that site, it's headsupguys.org or .ca, or I think both work. But that's an example of the type of resource that wasn't there when I went through that experience. So it does show some progress in terms of finding the right, messaging to reach men. And even then, it's slow progress. Just earlier today, I was asked, do you have any statistics about, what's the percentage of men that use counseling services? And, I don't know that we necessarily have any sort of national statistics that keep track of this. But if we look to, for example, the employee assistance program offered to public servants through Health Canada, which doesn't cover every department, but in their case, it's roughly only 30% of EAP users are male. So there's still a lot of work to be done around reducing that stigma and having men or encouraging men to, take on more help-seeking behaviors and to recognize that there's no shame in needing help when you're struggling and reaching out for that help. Certainly in my case, I don't think I could have, bounced back as quickly as I did from that major depression back in 2012 without the help of EAP. And, certainly that was a first-time experience for me using the service. And again, there is still that stigma, that shame. I remember for that very first EAP appointment, the counselor worked out of her home. And this was in my home community where I'm fairly known. So I just remember being parked outside of that house for my first appointment and, dreading getting out of the car for fear that somebody would recognize me and just know where I was heading into, right? So, there's different kinds of stigma. So we talk a lot about social stigma, but there's also that self-stigma where, you start to believe some of those myths around depression, anxiety, mental illness, where, you would argue that some people would think, it's a personality or a character flaw. It's something that you can just snap out of, as opposed to it actually being an illness. So, that took some time for myself even to accept. I'm going to maybe end. I want to keep us on time as much as I can. So I'm going to end with another little story from that experience of 2012. And that was, I guess, the moment that I realized that, that depression was an illness and that there were genuine treatment options available to help me get better. So when I was first diagnosed and went off work, my initial reaction to my doctor's suggestion that I go on an antidepressant was, no, I don't need any medication, right? I mean, this is just something I need to work through and it's temporary. I just need a bit of a break. In my mind, I was, well, to be frank, I think I was being delusional because I thought that I would maybe be off work for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then I'd be, ready to go right back into the lion's den, as it were, because there were factors in the workplace that triggered or contributed to that particular depressive episode in 2012. So at first, I refused to take medication, and the weeks started going by, and I think it was probably around the 6-week mark of being off work when my folks came over for a barbecue one Saturday afternoon. And I remember, my mom asking how things were going. And, I was honest. I said, in fact, I'm not feeling any better. I think I'm feeling worse. And my mom, like any other mom, started asking me questions and along the lines of, well, when do you think you might go back to work, right? And that's a big part of our sort of, family values in terms of that solid work ethic, right? So it was always coming back around to, going back to the workplace. And what I didn't tell her, because I again, we talked a little bit about not wanting to burden others and why we hesitate to open up. I certainly didn't want to burden my mother. But what I was thinking at the time wasn't when I might be going back to work. Frankly, I was wondering if I'd ever be going back to work, because in my view, I had failed, right? I had been broken in the office, and I just couldn't see myself, sort of going back. And then my mom, was a little surprised. She said, well, isn't the medication working? And I said, no, I'm not taking any medication, right? Again, my own sort of stigma or ignorance around mental illness. And that's, sort of the big eye opener, because it's at that moment that really the floodgates, were opened up, because that's when my mother started talking about our family history. So at this point, I'm 40 years of age. I've been off work for 6 weeks for mental health reasons. And I was completely ignorant of a family history of mental illness, particularly around anxiety and depression. And I'm learning about this for the very first time. And, that's when I found out from my mother that, she was on medication and had been for almost 15 years. That my maternal grandmother had actually been hospitalized in an institution for several weeks back in the 50s or 60s for major depression. And, so the truth came out that there was this family history. And that speaks to the power of stigma and why we need to have these conversations to normalize these mental health experiences. Because I was completely ignorant of this family history that it turns out was on both sides of the family, on my mother's and father's side. And that's the power of stigma. Even within our own families, we're too ashamed or embarrassed to talk about it, and so we don't. So for me, that was the, sort of that aha moment where the very next week I was in my doctor's office and basically said, give me that prescription. We're going to try this medication. And I was fortunate, certainly, that antidepressants, I'm told, tend to work in only about 30% of cases. And it can take several attempts on different medications before you find the right one. Well, the one I was prescribed at the time, really was helpful to me, and I was able to sort of resume work within a couple of months from going on medication. So, that speaks to the stigma. And finally, I think I'll just, I mentioned briefly Movember, and really I would credit Movember as well as the Bell Let's Talk campaign of 2013 for really getting me to share my own experiences with mental illness. November 2012 is, I was freshly back at work. I was still learning how to manage what turned out to be sort of an ongoing mental health condition called persistent depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder as well. So I do have that sort of double diagnosis to contend with. But all this to say that it was November 2012 where I first started sharing, my experience by raising funds for Movember and telling people in my closer circle, what I had gone through that summer. And then it was really with Bell Let's Talk Day in 2013 where I started to be more open publicly around my experiences, and later becoming a mental health speaker to share my personal story and some of the lessons that I've learned in recovery. One being, and I know I've been saying I was going to be ending on this, but I just want to touch one little thing that Michael mentioned was mindfulness. And yeah, we talk a lot about mindfulness today. But back in 2012, we certainly weren't holding mindfulness meditation sessions in office boardrooms. And that was one of the first things both my EAP counselor and my family doctor recommended to me. And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, I just don't see myself, sitting cross-legged on a lake shore somewhere, chanting mantras. Again, my own ignorance of what mindfulness was. But I later took a mindfulness-based stress reduction course that I found to be very, very helpful. And so, the main message there, I think, is just be open to what might work in your recovery. Medication doesn't work for everybody. So, it can be a combination of medication and counseling that will really sort of expedite your recovery. But it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So be open to different options in terms of climbing out of those mental health challenges on the road to recovery. So I think I will end it there so that we can give Galib a chance to tell his story. And then I believe we will have some time for questions, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Francois, and thank you for sharing your heartfelt and powerful personal story with us, and the advice that you provided for our audience today. Last but not least, it is an honor for me to welcome our next panelist, Superintendent Bayani. He has over 28 years experience in policing nationally and internationally, with his last position as of that senior police advisor to the government of Iraq in Baghdad. He leads a team of women and men in North Vancouver, BC, and is committed to the development of resiliency and trauma-informed leadership. Galib, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay with the thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And I'm really just taken aback by the two speakers today, Michael on the technical side of things, and Jean-Francois on your real openness and your candor. And what a great picture you just put up there with a cowboy hat. So I like it. I call this taking out the trash, and that's kind of how I frame this presentation today. I plan on operationalizing really what the two speakers have kind of combined together with stories and with the technical or the science piece around mental health. And I'm not an expert by any means. I can certainly tell you that from the very beginning. Let me just tell you, putting things into context here as to who I am. And I can tell you I'm an immigrant, I'm a refugee, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a husband. I like to think that I'm a leader, and I like to think that I'm a good teammate. And I tell you the first three or four to contextualize shame and cultural shame. And I see some different ethnicity on our lines here on the chat. I also see some people from North Vancouver where it's super cloudy and rainy right now. So it's nice to have some people on the line with me. But for my culture, there's a lot of shame. When you're a man, you don't cry, you don't look weak. Those are the things that I've had to kind of overcome as a result of being a man in my culture and in the kind of work I'm in, where the police are tough. I've been a police officer 28 years, been all over 41 different countries for work and for pleasure, and most of them conflict countries. I get attracted to those kinds of war zone countries. And I'll tell you the three things that I took away from Michael and from Jean-Francois, three words that were in the original presentation: winning, risk-taking, and primacy of work. And those three really resonated with me. I'm not a wife beater, or I'm not the playboy, those other things that I saw on that list, but those three kind of concepts I took away because that is who I am. And I sense that Jean-Francois was also, was also those things before his life started to change a little bit there. So in my 28 years, I started as a young police officer, and I'll tell you this, I was about 22 years old, and I went to a teenage suicide. So I'm a storyteller, so I will share this through intertwining a number of stories in this presentation. And I went to a teenage suicide of a 15-year-old girl, and I still remember it. It was hard. I'd never seen anybody die in my arms before, and she did. And then I went to, that night I had to kind of go home, and it was, oh crap kind of moment. Is this the right job for me? What am I doing? I just had somebody die in my arms. I had to go tell her family. And then that's the night that, you start having a couple of beers and you think, this will help. This will definitely help. The rest of that summer, I went to 5 more teenage suicides in a small community I was posted to back then. And I struggled. It was decision time for me. Can I do this? And looking around at all the people around me, mostly men, white men, tough white men, I got the punch on the shoulder. You got to tough it up. This is what we do. This is what cops do. And move on. Either you're in or you're out. And so I stayed in. But I never forgot that year. That was a very hard year for me. Moving forward, I got, as I moved through my career, I ended up in a city called Surrey. Some of you may have heard of it, especially if you're in British Columbia. It's a very second largest city in British Columbia. And that year I was posted there in 2014, they had upwards of, I think, 55 shootings, gang related. We, as in the executive team, were under a lot of pressure to address those shootings, the violence, and the community. And I remember having to go to a number of community meetings and dinners. And I remember eating out 3-4 nights a week. And most dinners would start around 10 o'clock at night in the community I was working with. And it kind of resonated on me that after a year of being there, that I wasn't feeling healthy. I wasn't looking good. I'd gained quite a few pounds. Unhealthy weight is what I'm trying to say here. And I realized that I needed to kind of rethink what I was doing in my life. And maybe this was not the right job for me, or maybe it was time to suck back a little bit and reassess my future direction. And I did. I ended up taking I've had 2 postings internationally, 2 big ones with the RCMP, both war-torn countries, Iraq a couple of years ago, and Sudan, as it was going through split from Sudan and South Sudan. And in those environments, I really learned about being in difficult places. I learned about resiliency. I learned about planning. And I also learned that, living in those hard environments, I was absorbing a lot in here. So I call it my bucket, actually. My bucket was getting fuller and fuller and fuller, but nothing was coming out. So I wasn't good at that part there of emptying my bucket as it was getting full of kind of the bad things, if you can put it that way. When I arrived in Baghdad, the first thing I learned about that place was that to keep going 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, I needed some distraction. And we created a club called the 50 over 50. I wasn't 50 at that time, close to, but we ran when they're the age 50, and it was over 50 degrees Celsius. So you go for a run. And I thought these people are crazy, but they encouraged me, my team encouraged me. And that is when exercise came back in my life. It had been 25 years before I had done anything like that. I only exercised to get into the police academy, stay in the police academy. And when I left, it had just gone out the window. I was I guess, primacy of operations work. Primacy of work was very important to me. And I read some of the comments as I was listening to the speakers about, work came first. And I wanted to be, that guy that was always there and recognized. And I received countless medals, awards for the work I did, but it really had no value. When you start thinking about, what am I really, what have I accomplished in my own personal life? When I was in Iraq, I also learned that my family was very quiet. When I said I'm going, I don't think I really asked. I said I'm going, and I don't think that was really fair. I found that I was very selfish. And I remember thinking to myself when I got to Iraq, the first strange thought, I thought to myself, who's going to take out the garbage? Because that's my job. My wife hates taking out the garbage, absolutely hates it. And she'll do anything, wash dishes, laundry, iron, vacuum, whatever, but not take out the garbage. And I had these visions of when I was in Iraq that our backyard was going to be full of garbage by the time I got back to Vancouver. And that's when it hit me that I never really communicated and planned with my family well about their health, my mental health. How would we, when I did the poll there as to some of the things that are going on in our lives, those things were happening back then. I wish I had a chance to get some of these techniques back then. My thought then started moving towards better planning, better communication. I think with mental health, communication is certainly very important. The ability to talk to each other and share that information. And I realized that my family wasn't doing well, also young kids, and I never really told them what I was going to do. And in Iraq, bombs kept going off all the time, and I just wasn't in a good place over there. But at the same time, my family was worried, and they weren't able to communicate effectively with me. So every time a bomb would go off, it could be days before we were able to communicate on WhatsApp to say, I'm okay, I'm okay. So I had a chance to really think about my mental health and their mental health. Came back to Canada, returned, and I took my personal health in my hands. I realized that I made a number of mistakes leading up to where I was, and I was selfish, and I was focused on work. I came back, and I can thank my wife for getting me a gym membership. And actually, I'm one of these people, when you spend money, I want to use it effectively. So if I'm going to spend $100 a month, or my wife is on me, I'm going to make sure I'm very thoughtful about how that money is being spent. And she got me a gym membership, and my running continued when I got back from Iraq. So all that to say, if it's exercise, if it's mindfulness, if it's yoga, whatever works for you, that will seem to work for me. It shed those unnecessary pounds and motivated me to continue. Returning back to Canada, I ended up at what I think is one of the best jobs ever, is the Chief of Police for North Vancouver, or the officer in charge of North Vancouver Detachment. And I made a few mistakes when I got here. I'll tell you that right now. I tell you, I'm driven. And my motto, since I have been a young police officer and even arriving here in North Vancouver, is there's no room for mediocrity. Mounties don't quit. We keep working, we work. Through the pandemic, we've pushed our people, and we don't quit. But I realized in consultation with some counselors like Michael, that my ethos and how I contextualized this message, I sent the wrong message to the men and the women. I'm including the women here in my detachment. I was in fact building a culture of burnout. I find that if people respect you, they want to work very hard for you, and they listen to you very closely. And I was actually building a culture of burnout here at the detachment for the men and the women. Sick days were not being used. Overtime was up. Our discipline and public complaints, some of the mistakes we're making in the community were up, and from good people, really good people. And I ended up talking to some counselors. I brought them in here to the detachment to meet with me, my executive team, and kind of unpack kind of what was going on here. We were seeing the stress in people's face. COVID amplified that, for sure it did, but a lot of this was happening before. And the message to me from these counselors were that your people are not robots, your team are not robots, but your signals to them are to overwork. And it's a culture that we inculcate, a culture of being tough. And I learned this just in the last 6 months. So when Sarah invited me here, I thought, wow, I can share some of this with you because it's very new to me as well. I learned that the better message for my team was to slow down in order to speed up. And I have started thinking about that myself. And I've started doing some research in the area, and Michael is probably very good at this. Fast brain, slow brain, our fast brain and our slow brain. And I've moved, when we're cops on the street, it's all fast brain and how you respond, you react, fight or flight. In my office, I needed to use slow brain. That's to slow down my decision making, to listen very closely to look, observe what's going on around with my men and women in my teams, and from there to be able to analyze what was happening. I started speaking with counselors as well in the building, and we brought a number of, we brought in psychologists here, and we gave everybody a 15-minute free session for a check-in. And from there, I think they picked up a lot of work from my building, which I don't look as bad. I look at it as good. I started tracking our mental wellness. We get one wellness day a year in the RCMP, and we have a really good sick leave program. I started tracking that. And one of my strategic priorities that we have to put one together every 3 to 4 years as a commander and share with the mayors and our elected officials is to reduce our sick leave, but also to increase the number of people taking our wellness leave. I want that number to be as high as it can be, which means that people are actually having a checkup day or taking some time off to just unpack, slow down, think, and then come back to work a little bit more resilient, a little bit fresher. Some of the things we implemented here for our men in this detachment and women too, but because this is a mentality webinar, I'll speak to the men, is that I started with bi-weekly emails to the team, having check-ins, encouraging them to take time off. Went down to our commanders that run the front line and said to them, if you see any cracks in anybody, you need to be on that. And from there, we provided them training so they can identify those cracks. Again, our folks are, ashamed to call EAP, and we're changing that. Our folks are embarrassed to talk to somebody. We're changing that too. But I had to give that training to our frontline supervisors so they could see these things and then act and be able to pull these people into the right direction. I can tell you, I also started including my wife and my kids at every event I attended in the community to demonstrate to my men and women that family is important. And I would bring them to community events, to any meetings I would go to, again, to show the team that, your family needs to come first. And if you have work to do, bring them to work. We can, not in a police car out at a gun call, but bring them to community events, to school events, to the office. And we wanted to foster that piece around family. I also brought in a registered psychologist to speak to the entire team and have her and him help me identify those that they felt were most at risk without giving up privacy, but making sure that those most at risk were looked after. And all those people I had the discussion with that, mediocrity is not good, we don't quit. I went back to all of them and had to change the context around that as speaking to the work they're doing, not the amount of hours they're putting in, 60 or 70 hours a week. So about the work they're doing, but not the coming to work and leaving their families at home. So we had to repackage and reframe that. Part of my longer term strategy here is to develop a 3-year, and we're 1 year into a resiliency plan for the detachment. I brought in experts. I found community grant money because the RCMP, as you know, as many of you in the federal government, money is tight right now. So we went out, and I encourage you to think about this. If Treasury Board allows you, there are banks that give money for free without interest. Those are community grants. So we tied that in and brought in some folks to do some resiliency work around us, especially our young people. We've had 5 suicides in the country this year from the RCMP. We've had a number in local municipal police services, all young men and women. And we can't have that anymore. I'm not going to put up with that in this organization. We have a peer-to-peer team of 3. I doubled that to 6, and we only had men, so we added women. And it's funny, like I'm more comfortable talking to a woman, but some people are more comfortable talking to a man. So we wanted to give some diversity, inclusivity into those teams. And what I now view in a different light, I'll tell you this, coming to the end of my presentation, is the word shame, vulnerability, courage and resiliency all look different to me. And I'm hoping to the men and women that work behind me in this building here. There's no shame in saying, I'm tired, I need to stop. And I have had a few people, my executives, say that to me recently. And we've had to sit down and say, okay, I'm so happy to hear that. So let's get you to stop for a while. The work will always be there, as Michael said, it will always be here. I can be here 80 hours a week and still not move the needle too far. There's no shame in saying, I need to breathe. And Michael's techniques were very good about that. There's no shame in crying. I can tell you that. I cried with that first suicide and the following 5. And I've been to, I think it's about 78 dead people in my career as a street cop. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to cry. There's courage in taking sick leave. 21 years before my first sick day, official sick day, came to work sick. I know with COVID, we're discouraging that, but just not feeling well up here, coming into work, well, I don't do that anymore. I take that time. And there's no shame in taking mental health breaks at work and seeking help. So the things, last 3 or 4 sentences, the things I need to work on are my emotional intelligence. And I encourage men to look deep inside, be self-reflexive about that. I need to slow down. And again, slow down to go fast. I love that statement, slow down to go fast. And things I do now right now is I do sleep 7 hours a night. I used to be 4 hours a night, 5 hours a night. I'm up to 7. And no, I'm a horror fan, no Netflix horror before I go to bed. It's a book, a really boring book to help me get into that mindset. Also, I think the exercise is a really good piece. And drinking, I'll have a glass of wine or two. I'm okay with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But know your limits. So I think I've shared my story with you. I could go on about lots of other things, but I want to just say, when you think about the word shame, vulnerability, there's a different meaning to it now. As a leader, I think you owe it to your team to be able to accept, understand those words, reframe them, rephrase them, and then apply what you've heard here today to your teams. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Gallup, for sharing your experience and the importance of your role as a leader to take care of your team and address their concerns to serve Canadians in the best ways possible. We will ask questions to our panelists. Michael had to leave, but I'll conclude before we start with the questions and comments. My goal for today's event was to remind you that mental illness doesn't discriminate and everyone should feel comfortable seeking help. To treat this problem, we have to get the message across that it's okay to ask for help, whether for yourself, your loved ones, or anyone you may think needs it. And for those who have overcome mental health obstacles in their own lives, don't be afraid to share them like JF, your own stories. Sometimes reducing stigma means being willing to talk about the times we've needed to ask for help ourselves. So now we'll go to questions or comments.
There was one for Jean-Francois, and the question was, what kind of a boss were you when you were experiencing these mental health issues?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think if you spoke to my staff at the time, generally speaking, a good boss, but they certainly noticed a difference in the final weeks leading up to the breakdown, where really I was beyond exhaustion, and it was starting to come out in terms of being a little snippy in the office, which is very unlike me. But, again, back then, we really didn't have open conversations around mental health in an office setting. So, it certainly wouldn't have been done for somebody to sort of take me aside and ask me how I was really doing. Are you really okay? Because I've noticed X, Y, and Z. Whereas the expectation today, I think, is very different. But while I may have been considered by my staff to be a quote unquote good boss, looking back, I wasn't necessarily a good leader in the sense that And I don't know if it was a lack of trust in my staff necessarily, but I was sort of playing a dual role of, I guess, sheltering them from some of these stressors in the workplace. But that meant that I was taking the full burden onto myself. So I wasn't very good at sort of, delegation and that kind of thing. And that certainly was, a contributing factor that pushed me into that major depression.
I have a question either for Gallup or JF. If we see a colleague at work who's not the same or who's struggling, what are some of the things that we can do to either help them or to, if there's anything that we can do to create a more comfortable environment for them to seek help? What advice do you have for us?
Jean-Francois, may I jump in first? And yeah. Okay, so what I like to do is I'm a big walker, and I've encouraged my other executives to walk around and we can see signals. We're a small group of people. There's only 250 of us in this building. Signals are very clear. And what we do from there is when you see those signals, I like to take people out for coffee, and it's weird because they're like, why is he taking me out for coffee? And from that, I'm also a good interrogator as a cop. You get to ask a lot of questions. So I think the thing is, don't be afraid to actually go in. When I say go in, I mean, go in and make the approach. If it's not you, maybe you identify someone in the building. We have the 6 peer-to-peers, and a part of our peer-to-peer model is a proactive approach with every person in this detachment is to go out and have a check-in, and that's just a walk-around check-in. And we find that some of our peer-to-peers are getting people sharing with them. And the other one we did was bring in that psychologist for free. They sat in here and everybody booked a 15-hour slot. That psychologist actually found the people that were most at risk and were able to convince them. I'm actually happy that our psychologist bill is through the roof here. Our people are getting that help. So actually our trajectory in paying for that has gone up. And that to me is a really good indicator that our barometer is going to be very healthy. So I don't feel bad about approaching people, and do it in a very, not in a threatening way, but hey, can we go for a little walk and let's have a coffee? And you have to build that. I think that takes a little bit of time, but I'll ask Jean-Francois, maybe he might want to add some more.
Sure. So, well, first of all, what we have to recognize and accept is that you can't force somebody to go and get help. They really have to sort of come to that conclusion themselves. So really the best thing that we can do is, express the concern that we have. Point them to the right resources where they can get professional help, and encourage them, to access those resources. But just in looking up sort of what's happening with the Movember 2020 campaign, I came across one of their tools that they're recommending to start those tough conversations, and that's the acronym ALEC, A-L-E-C. So basically it's ask, listen, the E is encourage action, and the C is check in. So that's what they're promoting for Movember 2020. And I guess that's an acronym that was developed by an organization, I believe in Australia, called Are You Okay? And so that's what I've been advocating is something very similar, different acronym. In mental health first aid, I think we talk about ALGE as the acronym. But really the point is don't ignore what you've observed, but check in with the person and do it in a non-threatening way. I think like Galib was mentioning, it's more about, I've noticed this, which is outside of, your usual pattern. So is everything okay? Can I help you with anything? So yeah, I would encourage you maybe to check out the Movember Canada website, and there's that little helpful acronym ALEC.
There's a great comment here which flows from Gallup's last comment as well, and it's that I wish all leaders and management cared about their staff like you. I see it slowly changing in the public service, but there needs to be more support, especially during the pandemic. I am happy to hear that it is possible and hope that there are more leaders like you. And I think that that is a comment that is echoed many times throughout our group chat. Just being that advocate for your staff that you were in hiring that psychologist and bringing that in and being so supportive and promoting that.
So if there are no more questions or comments from Amber or Frank, anything else?
Just scrolling through the comments, Amber pulled that one out from more recent times. I'm trying to go back to the beginning, but yeah, maybe we could start to wrap it up as we scroll through.
So I would like to conclude by thanking our panelists, Michael Cheng, Jean-Francois, and Superintendent Gallup, the Federal Youth Network, the BC Federal Council, and my colleagues with the Governexx Vancouver Island, Frank and Amber, for your support to making this event happen. And thank you to those that participated virtually today. From the Governexx team, we wish you all the best.